I'm pleased to share with you my perspective on the precarious peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia. I will start with the historical context and present a general overview of one, the boundary question in Africa, two, the Ethiopia-Eritrea boundary conflict, and three, the way forward to durable peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Of course, as a by way of introduction to our open discussion that will follow. Eritrea and Ethiopia have an old, pervasive, and problematic relationship burdened by a difficult narrative of conquest, war, and conflict, often impacted by the intricacies of shared ethnic and cultural affinity straddling the common border. At the core of this problematic relationship lies a long-standing antagonism between legitimate Eritrean aspirations for self-determination on the one hand, and expansionist Ethiopian ambitions for territorial aggrandizement on the other. The two peoples are closely bound by cultural affinity and economic and strategic interests. The multiple pillars of this relationship bear the potential to serve as levers of durable peace and political cooperation, drivers of economic integration, and anchors of regional integration. Let me feature two factors, one historical and the other contemporary, to help shed light on the intricacies and potentials of the Ethio-Eritrean relationship. These are, first, divergent narrations of history. Second, a flawed relationship. Narratives have the power to shape a people's mindset and change the course of history. A cursory review of the literature reveals that Eritrean and Ethiopian narratives render contentious, polemical, and often polarized accounts of the pre-colonial relationship between Eritrea and Ethiopia. The Ethiopian narrative uses pre-colonial history to claim 3,000 years of independence and historical control over Eritrea and the Red Sea coast, while the Eritrean narrative uses the same pre-colonial history to challenge this claim and prove the long-standing independence of the region of modern Eritrea. Neither narrative holds water. The ancient kingdom of Aksum that flourished in today's Eritrea and North Ethiopia declined on the eve of the first millennium, having retreated from the coast and fragmented under rival fiefdoms in their island bastions. The Abyssinians were cut off from the Red Sea for nearly 1,000 years. The rival fiefdoms expanded or contracted on account of their relative balance of forces. Abyssinia was at no time prior to the European colonial scramble for Africa during the last quarter of the 19th century in control of the entire territory of modern Eritrea or contemporary Ethiopia. Nor was Eritrea an integral part of Ethiopia, yet the two countries did not exist as such during the pre-colonial history of the region. During the advent of the European scramble for Africa, resurgent Abyssinia was both a victim of colonial aggression and a perpetrator of territorial expansion. Having thwarted Italian invasion in 1896, it expanded through wars of conquest, in collusion and rivalry with the European colonial powers, to occupy and subjugate adjacent territories and assume its present formation. Menelik adroitly exploited European rivalry and ambitions in the region to secure diplomatic recognition, procure modern arms, and acquire territories. He invaded and annexed Oromia, Harar, Wallagga, Walamu, Jimma, Kaffa, and Zombe. The European scramble for Africa coincided with the emergence, territorial expansion, and political consolidation of the Abyssinian Empire. In brief, modern Eritrea constituted the core of the Aksumite kingdom. The collapse of Aksum, however, irrevocably severed the territory of Eritrea per se from any enduring association with the political entities that periodically sprang up, thrived, or declined to its south, including Tigray, with which the Central Plateau, the Central Eritrean Plateau, shares close ethnic, linguistic, and cultural affinity. In the main, and for the most part, Eritrea remained a fragmented region, often partly autonomous and partly dominated. Legend aside, the Eritrean Red Sea coast had existed independent of Abyssinia of Ethiopia from the fall of Aksum to the late 19th century, a region of contention or a battleground of rival foreign forces. On balance, therefore, the historical record contests the Ethiopian claim of control and the Eritrean assertion of independence as untenable. For no state prior to the 1890s resembled the present entities called Ethiopia and Eritrea today. The colonial narrative may deny, but cannot negate, the existence of an autonomous Eritrean history, an indigenous Eritrean culture, and a common psychological make-up of Eritrea as a shared homeland of the Eritrean people. In brief, the region's pre-colonial history cannot undo the reality of a well-developed and distinctive Eritrean national identity, detract from the legitimacy of the case for Eritrean independence, or undermine the authenticity of modern Eritrean statehood. After all, the modern states of Africa, including Eritrea and Ethiopia, are products of the European colonial project. The second factor of conflict is a flawed relationship, mostly post-independence. The liberation of Eritrea and the overthrow of the DER in May 1991 installed the EPLF, that's the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, and the EPRDF, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, in power in Asmara and in Addis Ababa, respectively. The ascent of the wartime allies to state power heralded the apparent resolution of the historical antagonism and the advent of a new era of durable peace between a free Eritrea and a democratic Ethiopia. The independence of Eritrea dissolved the forced union between Eritrea and Ethiopia and created two sovereign states. The peaceful accommodation of this reality required Asmara and Addis Ababa to agree on a set of political, economic, and trade arrangements to enable a stable transition to a cordial relationship. Furthermore, they needed to institutionalize and broaden their bilateral relations at the levels of state, government, front, civil society, and people. Such measures would have reinforced the apparent reserve of political will to overcome the residual inertia of a contentious historical narrative and expedient alliance, and help sustain friendly relations, close cooperation, and durable peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Eritrea and Ethiopia maintained cordial relations during the 7 years of peace between the liberation of Eritrea in May 1991 and the outbreak of hostilities in May 1998. They established joint commissions and signed several agreements, including a mutual defense pact, to promote closer cooperation in the political, security, economic, trade, and social spheres. They started initiatives to coordinate foreign policy and diplomatic action on major regional issues, such as the crisis in Somalia, the threat of militant political Islam in Sudan, and the revitalization of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, or IGAD. The new relationship held great promise and generated high hopes that Ethiopia and Eritrea, having finally secured the peace, could serve as a nucleus for political cooperation and economic integration among the states of the Horn of Africa. Belying the outward manifestations of a close cooperative relationship, however, was an undercurrent of latent discord over several crucial issues. These issues included different visions of state construction, divergent policies of national development, disagreement over trade finance, and trouble in the borderlands. These issues of discord were not a problem per se. Rather, the problem lay in the nature of the relationship between the two states and the absence of institutional means to address the problems. Eritrea-Ethiopia relations were managed at the top, confined to the leaders of the EPLF and the TPLF. Affairs of state were personalized, while the mandate state government institutions were marginalized. The arrangement worked well when personal relations between the two leaders were good. When their personal relations turned south, however, things went wrong. When the push came to shove, brinkmanship came to the fore and took over. The absence of wise leadership and prudent statesmanship led to the outbreak of war. Once joined, both sides used territorial sovereignty as the trigger and the casus belli for the border war. With this historical context, let me come to the boundary issue in Africa. The boundary question in Africa has been at the forefront of the continent's post-independence concerns. The concept of a fixed, stable, and internationally recognized boundary in modern Africa is a European construct, implanted on African soil as a result of the territorial partition and colonial conquest of the continent. European colonial powers partitioned, carved out, and forged the modern nation-states of Africa. The new state frontiers were drawn in a haphazard manner without regard to interests and customary relations of the affected populations, and often artificially split same communities into 2 or 3 different colonial systems. Upon its creation in 1963, the Organization of African Unity adopted the principle of Uti Possidetis Juris, that is the sanctity of state borders existing at the time of accession to independence. The 1964 Cairo Resolution aimed to preserve the colonial legacy of the Westphalian state system and its fragmentation of the continent. On succeeding the Organization of African Unity, the African Union upheld the sanctity of colonial borders. On the other hand, Pan-Africanists have argued for the redrawing of Africa's colonial borders in favor of the political union of Africa. In the words of Ngugi Wasiongo, and I quote, "There is no rational basis other than convenience for regarding colonial boundaries as sacrosanct, and by implication, the residents of either side of the colonial border as foreigners. These borders were historically constituted, markers of European memory in Africa, to meet colonial needs, and there is no reason why they cannot be historically reconstituted to meet African needs and reconnect with African memory." End of quote. Pan-Africanism continues to advocate for 1. The economic integration and political union of Africa, 2. Greater solidarity among Africans to overcome the debilitating effects of foreign domination and cultural dependency on external assistance, and 3. Self-reliance to achieve real self-determination, sustainable development, and prosperity of Africans. Although Uti Possidetis Juris has gained universal legitimacy as an international and continental norm, sanctifying the preservation of colonial borders inherited at independence, territorial claims between African states, often protracted and sometimes militarized, have challenged the stability of the post-independence territorial status quo in Africa and undermined the prospects for post-colonial solidarity among independent African states. Moreover, the adoption of Uti Possidetis Juris and the declaration of adherence to the principle have generated neither universal respect for the delimitation of the borders existing at the time of accession to independence, nor the physical demarcation of interstate boundaries in Africa. The lack of reciprocal recognition of the exact limits of the common border, or the absence of visible boundary markers on the ground, has allowed recurrent territorial disputes and boundary conflicts in a continent where roughly 2/3 of the land boundaries remain physically undemarcated, even in cases where there exist no territorial disputes. Modern Africa's interstate borders remain significant factors affecting the continent's peace, security, and sustainable development. The Eritrea-Ethiopia boundary conflict is a case in point. Eritrea and Ethiopia, like most African states, owe their constructions, geopolitical formations, and respective international boundaries to imperial division, conquest, and partition of territory. The international boundary between Eritrea and Ethiopia was clearly delimited by 3 treaties signed between Italy and Ethiopia in 1900, 1902, and 1908. The 3 colonial treaties defined 3 sections of the entire 1,000-kilometer long Eritrea-Ethiopia boundary, tracing it along riverbeds and geometric coordinates. Thus, the Eritrea-Ethiopia boundary, or colonial treaty border, is one of the most clearly defined boundaries anywhere in Africa. Thus, the international border separating Eritrea and Ethiopia held untouched for an entire century. The historical colonial treaty border had remained remarkably stable from Eritrea's birth as a colony in 1890 until Ethiopia's unilateral withdrawing of the boundary in 1997, when it became a subject of prestigious inter-front dispute, not intergovernmental, but inter-front disputes. Eritrea had retained the integrity of its territory and the configuration of its boundary as defined by the colonial treaties. The boundary enjoyed formal international status, both de jure and de facto, during the periods of Eritrea's Italian colonial rule from 1890 to 1941, British military occupation 1941-1952, and federation with Ethiopia 1952-1962. Even when it became de facto an internal border during the period between Ethiopian annexation in 1962 and Eritrean liberation in 1991, it retained its de jure international status. The de facto dissolution of the Ethiopian Empire State in 1991 resulted in the separation of Eritrea and Ethiopia and Eritrea's accession to de jure independence in 1993, with its colonial borders intact. And the OAU and AU principle, policy and practice of the intangibility or sanctity of colonial borders inherited at independence. Ethiopia's withdrawing of the boundary happened 4 years after the independence of Eritrea. The Tigray Regional State produced, with the assistance of the German Technical Cooperation Agency, GTZ, now GIZ, a map of Tigray administrative zone, which unilaterally drew the historical colonial treaty border. The map, replicated in the new map of Ethiopia issued by the Ethiopian Mapping Authority and embossed in the new Ethiopian currency, altered Eritrea's international boundary with Ethiopia for the first time in a century. And this is not my statement, I'm quoting somebody else who's written specifically for a non-Eritrean, non-Ethiopian. It served as a blueprint to encroach on hitherto uncontested swathes of Eritrean territory, dismantle Eritrean administrative structures, expel Eritrean citizens, and establish Tigrayan authority over the newly incorporated swathes of Eritrean territory. This led to the displacement of people in the affected frontier regions and the destabilization of the borderlands. Inability to diffuse the resultant tension and resolve the issue through bilateral consultation or negotiation eventually prompted the outbreak of hostilities between Eritrea and Ethiopia and led to all-out war. International mediation efforts by friendly third parties, the United States and Rwanda, Djibouti, the Organization of African Unity, were unable to stem the escalation of hostilities. The neighbors fought unnecessary, avoidable, and destructive war. The Algiers agreement ended the war and committed the two states to settle their boundary disputes through final and binding arbitration in accordance with the colonial treaties and applicable international law. A neutral body, the Eritrea-Ethiopia Boundary Commission, limited and set to physically demarcate the boundary. Following 5 years of Ethiopian obstruction, from the 12th of April 2002 to the 30th of November 2007, the Boundary Commission declared the virtual demarcation of the boundary and finished its mandate. Ethiopia's refusal to accept and implement the Boundary Commission's delimitation and demarcation decisions resulted in the state of no peace, no war, that came to an end with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's declaration of Ethiopia's unconditional acceptance and readiness to implement the Boundary Commission's decisions exactly a year ago. Given this situation, what is the way forward? This time last year, we witnessed 3 sudden developments in the Horn of Africa. 1, the rapprochement between Eritrea and Ethiopia. 2, the lifting of the UN sanctions on Eritrea. And 3, the signing of the tripartite agreement between Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. There were high hopes and indeed great expectations that the era of bitter hostility and frozen conflict between Eritrea and Ethiopia would come to an end, and the process of healing the wounds of an unnecessary, avoidable, and destructive war would begin. That reconciliation between the two countries would help promote peace, security, and stability in the whole of Africa, and that stable peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia would create a conducive climate for a new relationship of political and economic cooperation in the region. We are all aware that the tentacles of the conflict system or conflict matrix in the highly strategic but extremely volatile Horn of Africa extend to the adjacent Red Sea Basin and the Nile River Basin. The Horn of Africa is home to fragile states and dysfunctional regimes. It's a region known for its turbulence, democratic deficit, and malgovernance. The Horn of Africa and the Red Sea Basin hosts the active military or naval presence and geopolitical rivalry of several world powers. The former US preoccupation with the so-called war on terror has given way to an increasing Sino-American competition for bases, ports, and access to resources, markets, and investment opportunities. There prevails a precarious alignment of forces and a constantly shifting mix of regional and international alliances. In Eritrea, a brutal regime has brought about economic ruin, political paralysis, and societal disintegration, turning the country into an earthly inferno. Ethiopia is facing the pains and pangs of transition. Conflict prevails within and between regional states, fanning inter-ethnic strife and internal displacement. Structural instability looms large, with no clear strategy or national consensus on the way forward. Beyond Eritrea and Ethiopia, the standoff between Eritrea and Djibouti remains unresolved. Somalia has yet to exercise central authority over its entire national territory. Civil war and internecine killings have badly scarred South Sudan. The popular resistance movement in Sudan is facing serious challenges. It's against the backdrop of this geopolitical context that we must take stock of the evolution of events on the ground in the Horn of Africa over the last year. The rapprochement between Eritrea and Ethiopia has apparently turned into a mirage. Neither the demarcation of the boundary nor the withdrawal of Ethiopian troops from occupied Eritrean territory has taken place. The 4 border crossings reopened between the two countries, with a lot of fanfare, have been abruptly closed. The Eritrean Joint Declaration of Peace and Friendship and the tripartite agreement between Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia remain mere incomplete. So a year on, it seems that we are still on square one. No definite steps have been taken to address the underlying sources of the conflict or resolve the issues of the boundary between Eritrea and Ethiopia. The status quo demonstrates the unabated volatility of the region, as well as the precarious nature of the peace and overall relations between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Durable peace demands that Ethiopia and Eritrea normalize and institutionalize their interstate relations. Once transparent state-to-state relations are set, all outstanding issues between the two countries can be resolved peacefully, so bilateral consultation, negotiation, mediation, arbitration, or adjudication, whichever the two agree on. First and foremost among these issues must be the boundary issue. In the context of cordial relations, it is possible to envisage a feasible solution, given the sanctity of colonial borders, the restitution of the historical colonial treaty border, informed by consultations with panels of elders in the borderland populations, would avail a durable peace. As a source of livelihood and identity, land in Eritrea is ancestral. It belongs to the village, irrespective of whether it's privately or communally owned. And each village knows the limits of its land. To sum up, it's increasingly clear that authoritarian rule in Eritrea is untenable, instability in Ethiopia is dire, and peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia is precarious. Durable peace and viable cooperation require a transformed Eritrea and a stabilized Ethiopia, with both states committed to democratic governance and inclusive development. I dare envision the evolution of a new relationship built on common strategic interests and shared values of a future of peace, progress, and prosperity for Eritrea, Ethiopia, and the region at large. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you. Another round of applause for the ambassador. Now we come to the question and answer time. So the rules of engagement is if do not extend it more than a minute, try to concise it to 1 minute. This way we can reach many questions at one time. So it is open for question and answer.
My name is Ken Wanaku, and I'm just being brave here, not that I have a question. But thank you so much for your expose. It was kind of extensive and a lot of information, and I was wondering if we could get a copy of or maybe it's in the book, or, you know, a copy of the presentation of what you just read. That would be interesting. But you mentioned two things that really caught my attention. It was the state boundaries between African countries set by Europeans, which is not good. And then number two, you mentioned something about the land belonging to the village, and everybody in the village knows the boundary of their village. I would like to hear more about that because I'm interested in protecting my own village. That's my question. So how will you help us to explain to our villagers to hold on to their land and not let other people come and draw the boundaries for them? That's my question.
Yes, the first question, the borders among African states have been drawn, fathered, without any regard at all for the interests and traditional relations of the community. In many parts of Africa, including our specific region, the same community have been divided between 2-3 colonial systems and post-independence between 2-3 states. To these people, given their traditional mode of existence, modes of production, the borders are really lying for the states, but they don't matter for them. They cross borders as before, but there is now a new form of conflict because the independent states want to use this border, to close this border. And this is part of the problem. And in a future Africa, of course, the vision, Pan-Africanist vision of an African Union, an African Economic Community, a united Africa is very far off. We can discuss what steps are necessary in order to achieve that. But pending that, African states must commit themselves to use these borders not as walls separating peoples, but as bridges connecting peoples, facilitating the free movement of people, goods, commodities, services, etc., capital, investment. But this is a challenge. It's easier said than done, but if the process moves forward, I mean, all is not lost. We can be hopeful. I was specifically referring to the situation in Eritrea. The implication of, so I want to be more specific on that. I was being general purposely. What I want to say is the border between Eritrea and Ethiopia is not disputable at all. And given political will from both sides, it could easily be resolved by consulting the local population. Because in much of the frontier, of course, we have settled agricultural communities and nomadic communities. But both communities know the limits of their land, whether they're farmlands or they're grazing lands. Okay? And so these governments can have a panel of elders composed from both sides. And given that land is held by villages, belongs to villages, each village knows the confines of its land. Each farmer knows the limits of his farm fields. Yes. It's not at all really a controversial issue. The problem is the lack of state or government institutions to address these issues peacefully in a way that safeguards the interests of the local communities. And as long as we have governments in Africa whose main preoccupation is self-preservation, we'll continue to have this problem. As I tried to imply in my initial remarks, the boundary issue was not really the real problem between Eritrea and Ethiopia. There were the other issues to which I alluded, and failure to address them is very easy to invoke territorial integrity, national sovereignty, when in fact that was not the issue. And then for 2 years, the borderlands between Eritrea and Ethiopia became killing fields. Okay?
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Ambassador. Good evening, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Manjo Ntutambe. I'm an Amazonian. I listened to your initial remarks, and what jumped at me is the comment about Ngugi wa Thiong'o, a Pan-Africanist, and the allusion to the sanctity of borders and independence. My presumption is when you talk about the sanctity of borders, you're talking about Article 4B of the African Union Constitutive Act. I believe that's what we're talking about.
Yes.
Thank you. And I'm looking at the conflict between 4B of the African Union Constitutive Act and the whole idea and whole notion of Pan-Africanism and how we come together and how measure powers in Africa or the lack of political will have given rogue regimes the excuse to use that in doing exactly what we Africans know that they do all over the continent. And how do we go about either pointing a finger directly at the corporates or trying to fix it in our generation going forward, assuming that those before us have honestly failed us?
I think a very interesting question. I think we need to go back to the time pre-formation of the OAU. The debate between the Casablanca group and the Monrovia group, but the Brazzaville group was a small group that was co-opted later into the two. The luminaries of the progressive wing, led by Kwame Nkrumah, Modibo Keita, Ben Bella, Ben Mahdi, and all these people. And in fact, symbolized by Kwame Nkrumah's May 24, 1963 statement on the eve of the formal creation of the OAU. He made a passionate appeal for a United States of Africa. That was overruled by majority vote, clearly. They opted to preserve the colonial borders. Now, what's the way out? I think the idea of a united Africa is very attractive, but you just cannot replicate the European Union, because from 1957, the Rome Treaty, until now, a process has been underway, building the foundation for a united, or at least a federal Europe. Of course, there are ups and downs, etc. In Africa, there are obstacles. First of all, African leaders are good at talking, but they don't walk their talk. They come up with magnificent declarations. When it comes to practice, need. So what do we need in Africa? First and foremost, we need to build an economic basis for eventual integration, which will then lead to political union. But economic integration needs infrastructure. You need physical infrastructure connecting the continent from north to south, from east to west. You need railways, roads, airlines, transport, communication network, all of that, facility. And then, of course, you have the artificial barriers, customs, posts, etc., etc. So, what does this require? First of all, huge investment. But the resources are there. We all know that more capital leaves Africa every year than comes in. And we don't know where this capital is hiding. This is held in private bank accounts of corrupt leaders. I can give you the example of my own country. Eritrea is quite rich in resources, gold mines, now potash. I mean, today the world market was dominated by Canada and Russia. In Eritrea, there is better grade potash, greater quantity, and easier to access. But where do the proceeds end? Nobody knows, except the so-called head of state and one of his cronies. So kleptocracy is a problem in Africa. So what do we need first and foremost is in each of our countries accountable, responsive governance. And that's our duty. No, we should not expect anybody to do it for us. We have to do it for ourselves. Once we have that, then we'll have the domestic infrastructures, and they can be linked interstate, so they can go from one to the other, etc. With that, you can also gradually maybe build the elements of political union. And building the elements of political union will require giving up sovereignty by the current African states. State sovereignty in favor of collective or continental sovereignty. But we do also need to build the institutions at the continental level. The African Union, the Commission, the Assembly of Heads of State, the Council of Ministers, the Peace and Security. All of these need to be really rebuilt in a very robust way, and in a way that can enable them to serve Africa's interests is a matter of priority. And to do that, of course, you have many problems. Many of the countries don't even pay their annual dues. The AU is dependent for its budget on external assistance. Whoever pays the expenses will also set the priorities. There's no question about that. So there are a lot of things that need to be done. But the first step is for every African people, for every African country to put its house in order. And then we can deal with our neighbors. Because I think this is the age of regionalism. You have the European Union, you have ASEAN, you have all kinds of regional groupings. And we cannot do a separate, independent states in a world that's becoming increasingly a global village. So we need to build, we must use this African regional economic communities as the building blocks for the future African economic community, and then build also the African political structures to gradually, incrementally arrive at the African Union. That is going to be a long process. It will require hard work. It will also require political and commitment on the part of African leaders, not the current leaders. Of course, there are some current leaders. So there are some well-governed countries in Africa. It's relative. You can take Botswana, the island states, Ghana, as examples, for instance. The rest are very far away. But as every people fight to bring their own countries in order, clean up their houses, and have accountable, answerable government, I think the process of unifying the continent and, of course, rectifying the wrongs done by the colonial partition of Africa can begin. But it's neither an easy process nor can it be achieved very soon. But it's an idea worth fighting for.
Thank you. All right.
Mr. Ambassador, first of all, I have to say, can I take 2 minutes instead of 1? Okay, thank you. My name is Mersey Kidan. I'm an Ethiopian and specifically of Tigrayan origin. I have to say I'm very much impressed with the eloquency and your articulation of your cases on your presentation. Saying that, I have to respectfully disagree on your first case about the narration of the history of the people of Ethiopia and the people of Eritrea. You concluded that the people of Eritrea have completely alienated history than the people of Ethiopia before colonization and the expansion of Menelik. But without going to details because I don't have time, there is a living monument at the center of Roma, the capital city of Ethiopia, called Square Cinquecento, right? The square, the 500 Italian soldiers who died at the Battle of Dogali in today's Eritrea. So in that battle, today's Ethiopia and today's Eritrea, then the two states may not be the same states that we are talking about today. The people of both fought together and defeated colonizers. So they have a common history. And my question to you is, why is it that such a knowledgeable people like you are not interested to bring that to the front and more promote and assert that we have been different for a long time, which I do not think the case. That's one. The second is, with respect to the Ethio-Eritrean war, why most of your recommendations and assertions, whether intentionally or not, you skipped the findings of the investigative committee that the Eritrean government was found to be the aggressor of the first aggressor. So the reason I'm saying this, both cases, is that I really respect the struggle the Eritrean people went through to gain their independence. There is enough rationale, there is enough reason to be a state, to be an independent, an independent people. There's no need to deny or to distort history. Our common history should be a pride for all of us. But today, the people fought to gain their independence, and you should be very proud of that. And that's something to really respect, and I respect that. And on the second,
You have asked me two questions. Can I answer them?
Thank you.
I may forget. Okay. Look, my presentation was general. I did not go specific. What you need to understand is I alluded to the commonality, the Central Plateau, Mr. Tigray. I said that much. But Eritrea today and the Eritrea we're talking about are different. Eritrea is not merely the Central Plateau. And of course, we can discuss the Bahari, it was, of course, independent. I said that untenable because they are not wholly true. I do not mean to deny the existence of the brief period of history. It's not only in Dogali, but also against the Egyptian invasions in Iraq, in all that, we know that, in Gilda, all of that. It's part of our common history. But Eritrea is not merely the Central Plateau. Eritrea is also the Western lowlands. Eritrea is also the coastal plains. So I was talking of the two entities of Eritrea and Ethiopia as such. And in a context like this, I could not go into detail. Otherwise, I fully agree with you. Yes, there is an element, that period, in the late 19th century. Yes, but before, after. So when we talk about Eritrea and Ethiopia, we are talking in the context of nation states, as established as a result of the European colonial project. Present-day Ethiopia was established also as part of the European colonial project. I mentioned some of the areas to which Menelik was able to expand and create the so-called Abyssinian Empire. Okay? So I do appreciate the commonality of a shared history, and I alluded to that. But in a general presentation like that, I could not go into detail. Otherwise, yes, there is a specific period of history with the Eritrean Plateau, and there were invasions, counter-invasions, divided, dominated, sometimes. All that is allusion to that. From Eritrea, invasions to Tigray, from Tigray, domination from one, expanded, contracted, periodically, account of the balance. All of that is in place. So I don't deny that, no. The issue I was dealing with was the boundary issue. Under the Algiers Agreement, it was agreed to establish 3 commissions. One commission was not even established, the investigation commission. The findings of the Claims Commission, I'll be very frank here with you. I know what was happening. I was there. And I'm an insider. I know what was happening in the High Commission between the two countries. The government of the Central Bank. I was not only in the Economic Commission, Joint Economic Commission, but also in the High Commission between the two countries. So border was not the issue for me. As I said, there were other issues. Okay? Who started the war? I can go into detail. What I said, much of what I said is actually sometimes a paraphrase, sometimes the quotations from my book, but updated. Okay? Who started the conflict? For me, the conflict was unnecessary. The problem was when the relations between Isaias and Meles, both of whom I knew very, very closely, very well, they were unable to sit together and resolve it. I proffered my advice 6 months before that. I was not in Eritrea at the time, I was elsewhere on assignment, okay? But I could see what was coming because of the change in the change in the tone, even in the kind of relationship. Okay? So I said, war is coming, it's not in our interest. It's not in the interest of either side. But it came anyway. It did not benefit anybody. Who is the aggressor? To be very frank with you, I stated quite clearly that the colonial treaty border had existed for 100 years, and it was unilaterally altered in 1997, July 1997. You can look at Wade, the publication of the TPLF. There was no explanation. That in itself is an act of aggression. But what we had is an incompetent government in Eritrea, which did not even see it fit to protest, to make a diplomatic démarche with the UN, the EU, etc. Again, when then Chief of Staff Khan asked the then Defense Minister if they could move to pursue or chase the Hukum, you all know what that means. Admiral said, okay. If I were him, I would say no. We'll take care of that. You stay on your side. They came in, they dismantled local administration. I don't want to go into the details. But incrementally, acts were being committed that violated the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Eritrea. And one of the fundamental functions of a government is to protect the integrity, sovereignty of its territory, and the safety of its people. The government of Eritrea failed. If diplomatic initiatives were taken, if real, genuine discussions were really undertaken at that time, the war would have been avoided. Maybe I can refer you to the two letters, handwritten between Meles and Isaias, Conrad, etc. Is that state-state interaction? No. No. It's the fault of these two people that the borderlands became a killing field. So I was there. What have these young men and women who were rounded up and really forced into the killing fields? No. There is no justification for it, in my view. It was a failure of leadership on both sides. The Claims Commission can do whatever. I dispute that. I traced step by step what was happening in the relations between the two countries, in the evolution of the conflict, and in the escalation of the war. Once it started, I mean, the United States in Rwanda made really a very sensible proposal. SAS had accepted it when the then Undersecretary of Secretary of State Susan Rice announced it. He was beefed, and he said, look, and then back. We all know what happened. It was unnecessary. Maybe, you know, the people who sent these young men and women to war had nothing to lose. But most people lost. Most of all, lost opportunities for development. Our scarce resources had opportunity cost. We could have better used them to develop our countries, to develop our infrastructure, to build schools, universities, health services, etc., etc. What is a waste? A waste of resources, destruction of infrastructure, and loss of life. So, if you want, I put the blame on both of them equally. Look, even when the so-called, when the event took place, when the Eritrean officers were killed, that to me was not enough of a reason to go and attack the way SAS did. Okay? There was no sense of proportion in the action and reaction that the two leaders exchanged. Even when that happened, there was no sense in Meles going to parliament and saying we are invaded with clear war. Both steps were wrong. They could have been avoided. If they could not settle these issues alone through negotiation, they could have invited somebody they both trusted. But neither of them cared. They had also their internal problems. Yeah? I can say, I'm not sure Meles was really aware of what was going on in Tigray. You know, you had a split within the TPLF. we have problems with the EPLF. That also is a factor. I don't want to go into details, but it's a very complex, intricate set of factors that led to the war, which in my view was available and necessary, that it happened. Now, we should not really dwell on the past. We should try to heal the wounds of the war and build a better future for our peoples, for our countries. Our peoples do not deserve the human condition in which they exist. So I think we cannot forget the past. Look, with the war also the deportations, crimes against humanity themselves. Tens of thousands of people were forcibly deported. Why? There is no such case in history, in the history of the two countries. During the 30 years war we waged, neither Umar Haile-Selassie's regime nor Colonel Mengistu's regime deported Eritreans to such a scale. So these are things we cannot forget, okay? But we should forgive. We should actually heal them and move forward so we can build a better future of cooperation, and eventually maybe we're talking about African Union, African integration, regional integration, not just Eritrea and Ethiopia, but Somalia, Djibouti, the Horn of Africa proper, the greater Horn of Africa. We have IGAD, the regional economic community. We have other regional economic communities. These, after all, are designed to be the building blocks of the future African economic community. So we should think in those terms. We cannot forget, we should not forget the past, lest we might have to repeat it. But we should not dwell on it. We should think of how we can heal the wounds of the past and move forward to build a new relationship.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador, and it has been a great honor to hear you. And it is so important that we should talk our future. By the way, my name is Girma from Oromo community of Minnesota, and we have this history. Our difference is so little, and our similarity is so great. Our similarity is so higher than we think. So, we are here now. I don't want to repeat what you said. I really love a lot of things. And now we are here. How we can integrate, how we can come together and leave a good legacy for our children, at least. We may not exist 50 years from now, but we have to think something that should help our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren today. We have to think about that. We are living in 21st century. Some leaders can lie today. Some leaders can say so much today. So much promise, but doing nothing. We cannot afford that now. I'm more than happy to join the Eritrean community and beyond to work for the common goal, building the nation and nationality and the region and beyond. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I fully subscribe to your perspective. I think we have a common future. It's a question, how do we build it? How do we build it? In the current state of affairs within Ethiopia, I think there is need for stabilization in Ethiopia. What's going on is unacceptable in terms of Ethiopian people themselves. There is a need for democratic transformation in Eritrea. I said that Eritrea has been turned by its regime into a living hell. It's a small country, very small country. And our problems are small and manageable. But what we have is a regime that cares purely, exclusively about self-preservation. It's up to us Eritreans to get rid of this regime. But in the process, we also need solidarity, international solidarity from our friends. That is a task that we ourselves must accomplish. If we get our house in order, Ethiopians get their house in order, the Sudanese get their house in order, the Somalis get their house in order, then I think we can come together and build this really bright future of peace, cooperation, integration, and we can be an example. I mean, for me, I have traveled throughout the world, throughout Africa. There is no group of people or group of states, or I should say at the people level, who have so much in common with the people in the whole of Africa. And they have such a potential, a huge potential. The problem is we've had nasty governments. If we can get rid of these nasty governments, and we can have governments that take themselves as servants of the people, then I think that's the way forward.
Right. Ambassador, my name is Elia. I come from Sudan. In light of what's going on in Ethiopia, especially what transpired yesterday, do you think the conflicts that are within the Ethiopian system, if I may, are the reason for what you alluded to earlier as the peace being a mirage? Do you think whatever is going on in Ethiopia is the reason that peace hasn't really solidified and taken the course that we all strive for?
What happened yesterday in Ethiopia is a profound concern, not only to Ethiopians, but to people in the entire region. Ethiopia is the largest and most strategic country in the whole of Africa. Instability in Ethiopia can spill over. And the countries in the region are too weak, too fragile to absorb the shock. So stability in Ethiopia is in the interest of every people in the region. One. The reason I said it's a mirage is not related to what happened yesterday in Ethiopia. You know, the decision of the Boundary Commission has been in place since 2002. Ethiopia has prevaricated, they came with 5 points, etc. Essentially, the former government of Ethiopia wanted to revive the Hague decision. That's why we've had a state of no peace, no war between the two countries. Now, when the frozen conflict was defrozen, at least we thought it was defrozen with the rapprochement last year, first and foremost must be the demarcation of the boundary. Why is it important? Because, as I said, it was used as the casus belli of the war. And the people in the borderlands have been affected for so long. And also, the border defines the limits of domestic jurisdiction for each country. With Ethiopian troops still in occupation of sovereign Eritrean territory, we have people who live under occupation. How can you consider that peace? Might be peace for the leaders, but not for the people who are being affected by the continuation of the no peace, no war situation. Even though, of course, we've said that, of course, there is peace, there is peace and friendship treaty signed between the two countries, etc. So the demarcation of the boundary must take place, because today, as I said, the historical colonial treaty borders are sacrosanct. And today we have, of course, state sovereignty overriding collective sovereignty. So we have to reestablish this and then move incrementally how we can achieve the greater objective. And the border crossings that were open have been closed without explanation as to why they were closed, or with a hint, without a hint as to when they might be reopened. So despite the high hopes and expectations that were set a year ago, we're back, not really back to square one, but we're still on square one. We've not moved an inch. So for me, it's very important that the border issue is resolved. Since it was only one of the factors, not the main factor, then once the border issue is resolved, first of all, we need to have normal state-to-state relations. You know, when the relations between the two leaders were good, I mean, the situation was okay. When the relations went bad, then war came. And now the confinement of the relationship between the two leaders makes you, well, concerned that history might repeat itself. And so for me, it's very important that Ethiopian troops withdraw from sovereign Eritrean territory, that the boundary is demarcated, that the people in the borderlands know to which country they belong, and which country they can expect to provide them with social services, education, public health, infrastructure, etc., etc. So it's because of this, there's been no movement on the issue. But the boundary issue is resolved, and I'm not saying we should actually implement the boundary question, the boundary commission's findings. I think a more durable solution would be to go back to the colonial treaty border, consult the population in the border areas on both sides, and agree on a new border, or on the international border, the way it should be. But once that's settled, then there should be a mechanism to address and resolve all outstanding issues. You know, they have established, they signed a treaty of peace and friendship, where they list a number of areas of cooperation. There are all kinds of issues. There are asymmetries in various aspects of the relationship. Economically, if the two countries are to, say, cooperate economically. Eritrea is a closed economy. The private sector has been squeezed out, where Eritrean entrepreneurs are not in Eritrea, where the monopoly of the PFDJ, which is of course fully managed, etc., has virtually destroyed the Eritrean economy. How can a destroyed economy cooperate with an economy that has been developing? We need to address these issues. Infrastructure. We need to address these issues. So there are a number of issues that need to be addressed through negotiation by the two sides. But there should be a priority of which issues are addressed first. For me, the boundary issue is number one, then all other issues. There are a number of issues between the two countries. We are neighbors, and we're blessed to be neighbors. But we have to have a new relationship that makes the boundary between the two countries as a bridge connecting the two people. So people in the borderlands, they intermarry, they cross, they don't recognize the border either. If you want me to tell you the truth. So we need to restore a relationship that allows the free flow of people in the borderlands, the way they have been doing it for millennia. So these are some of the issues. No, I'm not referring to what happened yesterday. Whose details are still murky, and I really cannot comment on that until I find out more details.
The reason I mentioned what happened yesterday is it seems like Ethiopia needs to put its house in order for them to be able to resolve the border issue with Eritrea. Because within Ethiopia itself, it seems like there are conflicts, there is a lot of pulling and pushing that's not allowing the government to focus on that. They're rather focused on happening inside Ethiopia. Thank you.
Yes, when I was referring to Ethiopia, I'm talking about the mass displacements. Millions of people displaced internally. We all know that. Okay? There is conflict, not only between the regional states, but within the between regional states and within regional states. This conflict needs to be addressed. For me, as a very interested and close observer, I do not see a clear strategy nor a national consensus evolving within Ethiopia as to how to move forward. And this is a profound concern.
Good evening, Ambassador. My name is Ali Song, and I'm a member of Tempo Afrique TV, and I'm originally from Senegal. My first part is a comment, and then I'll go to the question. Thank you for the presentation. It was a great presentation, very clear, very concise thinking. I think as Africans, we spend a lot of time in the symptoms of our issues. If you're taking Europeans or Americans, the constituencies are internal, meaning that the sovereignties are internal. In the African case, the sovereignty is external. So we have 80% pressures from outside and 20% pressures from inside. So a lot of these regimes don't even control the capital cities, let alone the countries. So when we're talking about borders and a lot of the language that we're talking about, I think throws out the real reality of our thinking. Because if our goal is to resolve these issues that we're facing, how do we feed our people? How do we provide them health? How do we provide them schooling? Which is basically the role of a government, which we have not been able to do for the last 600 years since we encountered Europeans. So at this point right now, I think Africa needs its own institutions. The narrative that we discuss about are always the symptoms of the problems or the issues, the external pressures that they put on us. Oh no, he's from Tigray, or he's from Oromia, or he's from, and we answer to those questions. But we never proactively go towards the issues that we're trying to resolve, proactively going to, this is what we want. Our fears overcome most of what we do. So we react to the fears, but not proactively going, this is where Africa needs to go. This is the new Africa. You take a country like Senegal, you have a small country like Gambia within it, and we're still talking about it 60 years afterwards. And we cannot always blame the colonial powers in regards to our inability to be able to be proactive. So that was my comment. And in the case of Eritrea now, I know that the last 20 years has been very harsh. So it has gone through a lot of ups and downs and havoc. But everything that happened is not totally negative. Because the thing that we lack in Africa is self-reliance, self-discipline, and self-continence. For most of the continent, it has been a problem. We rely too much, the African Union you mentioned earlier, for its own budget has to come from outside. So the things that I don't want us to always throw everything about the table and focus sometimes on some of the stuff that we can learn from the regions. Because if we erase everything and we start over again, then we would have lost the lessons that we could have learned from this last 20 years of this experiment that I would say, because it's unique in the African case. So that's the question that I'm saying, how do we move forward from this point forward? Not destroying everything that's the regime, because we talk about people. And generally speaking, there are systems, I think, that are underneath. We could take out today Isaias and bring somebody else, but I think until we resolve the core problems, I don't think our issues are going to pan out. So thank you, Ambassador.
I fully agree with your comment. With regards to your question, I'll be very frank with you. The concept of self-reliance, which we developed and put to good use during the war, was very effective. It meant for us, simply put, rely on your own resources, mobilizing your people, mobilizing your resources first and foremost. But it does not preclude external assistance that does not compromise the independence of your decision or policy. That was our strength. And in fact, during the war, I had this plan to write a book on how we did it in a self-reliant manner, and to convey that as a world historic legacy for all peoples fighting oppression, exploitation, repression, etc. But moving forward, post-independence, while we use self-reliance as an instrument of liberation to mobilize our people and our resources, post-independence, it became, what can I say, a tool to justify the regime's self-isolation, externally, the state of underdevelopment. I'll tell you, in the last few years, I mean, since independence, impoverishment has taken place in Eritrea on a large scale. Poverty has been widened and deepened throughout Eritrea. Self-reliance? What's self-reliance? Self-reliance is used to conceal the mismanagement of the regime, the economic misery of the people, the wretched human condition in our country. Why do you think tens of thousands of youth flee the country, risking death in the Sahara Desert from dehydration, drowning in the Mediterranean? I'm sure you've heard of Lampedusa, the tragedy of Lampedusa, drowning in the Red Sea. Why? Enslavement in Libya, beheading in Libya. Why? Escaping from what has become a life, infernal life in Eritrea is worth risking your own life. Why? So you might be attracted by the rhetoric of the regime, but its practice is abominable. It has impoverished Eritrea. It has actually damaged the image of the country. Most of all, it has degraded the self-respect of our people, the pride of our people. There are many Eritreans now. Why do we fight for independence for this? It's not independence that blame here. It's the policies and practices of a government which has taken self-preservation as its primary role and used every mechanism to establish very tight control and indeed regimentation of society. They have introduced a coupon economy. In this day and age, we are in the 21st century. Why do you need a coupon? Why do you need rationing? No, Eritrea is a resi-littoral state. Eritrea has two major ports. We have the potential to build 10 ports that could serve the entire region. We have huge resources, fisheries. I'll tell you one thing. There was an European Union funded project that found that Eritrea has the capacity to sustainably exploit about 100,000 tons of fish per year. The real output, not even 10,000. Everything that starts must be nipped in the bud, because the regime is interested in self-preservation, in doing a national service, for instance. I can give you examples. National service, we all support it. Why? We are a small country. We had, when we liberated the country, about 100,000 men and women under arms. But Eritrea did not have the capacity to sustain such an army, nor did it have really the reason, the need for it. No. Our security will be best served by good relations with our neighbors, by cooperative relations with our neighbors. But we live in a very volatile, very turbulent region, characterized by constant conflict, turmoil, etc., etc. So we needed to build a small army, a well-equipped, well-trained army, air force, navy. But in case of need, we needed also a general population acquainted with the use of weapons, with the tactics of modern warfare, etc. So it was intended as a potential capacity of deterrence, not aggression. So, yes, when you listen to the apologists of the regime, you might be attracted by what they say, but it's very vacuous. Inside it, there's nothing. So, I think we need to scratch the surface and go a bit underneath. I know many people who go to Eritrea and say, oh, it's wonderful, the country is so stable, so peaceful, you can walk at night, etc. Do you know what happens? Have you talked? Have you discussed these issues with any person? How many relatives, how many family members they have in prison, how they live, etc., etc. So there is, yes, there is stability in Eritrea, but stability acquired by strict societal control and regimentation. Every policy is designed to establish tight control over every aspect of national life. Is sustainable? I don't believe so. And might become very soon. But don't be fooled by what you do.
Okay, now we can add 3 more questions. We can go all night. But after the 3 questions, we have a poet, J.L. Davenport, who visited both Asmara, Eritrea and Ethiopia, and she wrote a poem about it. So we'll close by your poems. And I'll give it to you. So, okay, hold on.
Hello, Ambassador Andebrhan. It's nice to meet you in person. I really appreciate your down-to-earth personality here. What I want to say is that the no war, no peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea has been the death of Eritrea. I would say that because I think all Eritrea knows this, but other African brother and sister, you might not know the details, but literally Eritrean family unit has been completely destroyed. So the reason I say this is that at this time, if a loved one dies in Eritrea, they don't even have villages and towns. They don't even have to dig the ground. Men, the women, literally digging the ground for the dead one. So this, what I want to say is, this self-reliance is purely cosmetic and propaganda. And I would like, you know, brothers and sisters from Africa, really, I want you to talk to Eritreans more and talk to them what's happening in Eritrea. And to go back to Ambassador Andebrhan, you know, I'm sure with your expertise and education, you could have made a buttload of money working in the private sector. But I appreciate that you are not only educating or researching about Eritrea and how we can survive, also you're thinking more of the broader Africa. My question to you is the 2. 1, between Meles and Isaias Afwerki, the relationship between 2 of them led us to thousands and thousands of deaf people on both sides. So how do we deal now? There is similar situation going on right now between Abiy and Isaias. It's going to happen. The history is going to repeat itself. So how do we do Eritrean and also Ethiopia to prevent any war going forward? The other question that I have is, you as an Eritrean and an African, you are doing this, you are educating people. Do you have any other Africans, including Ethiopia's intellectual, who works in this situation just to help us how to deal with it? What you say is like the European Union, America itself is big, even other countries are trying to create a coalition. Africa is actually a perfect, you know, geographically to make coalition. If there are there any intellectual in Africa who thinks this way? Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I actually did not finish my answer to you. Instead of writing on self-reliance, my hope was to write about the experience in wartime and to use self-reliance to fast-track the rate of development for Eritrea, to jumpstart economic development using self-reliance. But that was not to happen. That's why I have to write a narrative of triumph, betrayal, and so I abandoned all the material I had collected during the war and post-independence because the situation in Eritrea at the time I sat to write did not warrant that kind of book. So I changed it. It's not really the state of no war, no peace. It was only a pretext. The state of no war, no peace, there was no respect going back to war. But it was used as a pretext to personalize power, okay? To make national service indefinite, despite the legal limits, to introduce your people in economy, essentially, as I said, to regimentalize the society. Okay? Otherwise, the state of no war, no peace did not preclude the possibility of a constitutional government based on rule of law, did not preclude the possibility of national elections to establish a democratic government, did not preclude. It was used as a pretext to impose a personalized sort of rule. So we have to know there are reasons, real reasons, ostensible reasons. So it was used as a pretext. Even the sanctions was a pretext. There was no Eritrean on the list of sanctions. It only applied to, say, asset freeze, travel ban, but no Eritrean account, no account of an Eritrean was frozen. No Eritrean was denied travel. So but it was used by the regime as a pretext to justify the consequences of its management and failed policies. One. Now, moving forward, I think I can't say there are formal forums for the discussion about the future, but I can tell you that recently I have participated in conferences on peace and security around the Red Sea, attended by the governments in the Red Sea littoral states, except Eritrea, Ethiopia, which is not a Red Sea littoral state. And we've had opportunities to meet with Ethiopian counterparts. And there is a shared understanding of what needs to be done and how we can do it. And there are some ideas, some proposals to organize meetings of Eritreans and Ethiopians to discuss the causes of the war and the means to heal the wounds of the war and the possibility to build the foundations for a common future of peace, cooperation, integration, eventually regional, and talking at the level of IGAD. So, but these are only tentative. They are not formalized. And also you need resources to organize this. We cannot do that on our own, it's true. But the idea is there, and informal contacts are there, but we need to formalize them.
Okay, we have two questions, one for you. I'm coming.
Good evening, Ambassador. My name is Zachariah Isaac from Somaliland. My question to you is, thank you, first of all, for the presentation. We appreciate your presence and your sharing of expertise. My question to you is the economic integration in the East African regions, led by Dr. Abiy about a year ago. the Eritreans mostly benefited from that movement because the microphone is off. I apologize about that. So the Eritreans benefited mostly from that movement because the UN lifted so the UN lifted the sanctions. Now the movement of the immigration, economic immigration, stagnated for some reasons. Was it because of Somaliland is not included? Because with your knowledge and expertise, I'd like to hear what your opinion is for East African countries to get involved in resolving the border disputes between Somaliland and Somalia before even getting into this bandwagon of integrating the region economically. That's my question. Why can't East African countries get involved in resolving the disputes between Somaliland and Somalia to move forward with this plan?
Thank you. First of all, the sanctions had no effect on Eritrea, except the arms embargo. And we all know now, anybody can buy arms in the black market. Okay? The only thing is you have to have a premium. It's more expensive in the black market. Otherwise, the proceeds from gold, from potash, etc., the regime is not short of money. The sanctions were used as a pretext to justify the failings of the government, the outcome of the failed policies of the malgovernance exercised by the government. The sanctions have been lifted, there has been no change in Eritrea, no change in the livelihood of the Eritrean people, in the condition of the Eritrean people. That's a fact. But there has been one element of isolation, the creed for the regime. First he uses, okay. So that. In terms of the countries of the region, look, IGAD was revitalized in the 1990s, with Ethiopia and Eritrea working together very closely. And there was high hopes that IGAD would serve not only as a regional economic community, but as a mechanism to develop the country with lots of infrastructure projects, internally to be funded, also externally, from the EU, World Bank, IMF, etc. There were a number of projects. Projects from linking Mombasa and Massawa, linking Djibouti to other places, etc., etc. None of this materialized. In brief, the war between Eritrea and Ethiopia paralyzed IGAD. So IGAD became ineffective. Eventually, IGAD turned into an extension of Ethiopian foreign policy, and therefore undermined the very legitimacy of its existence. Okay? When you're paralyzed, you can do nothing. And that was the state of affairs. But with peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia, it's not only Somalia that's excluded. Djibouti was also excluded in this tripartite agreement. It's very important. Even the border standard has not been resolved between Eritrea and Ethiopia. There is really no issue, to be very frank with you. I can tell you what happened. It's also linked to the former problem with Ethiopia. At the border between Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Djibouti is Mount Musa'ali. And the border, the trisection, where the three borders connect there, you have the Ethiopian section, the Eritrean section, the Djibouti section. Omergele allowed the deployment of Ethiopian troops on the Djibouti side. Well, to avenge for that, Isaias militarized a small piece of territory that was agreed between France and Italy, according to the Rome Treaty, to remain demilitarized. But it is Eritrean territory. It was under Italian administration as part of the province of Denmark. So what Isaias did was militarize an area that was agreed to be demilitarized between France and Italy and the former colonial rulers. So it's not just Somaliland, it's also Djibouti. A revitalized IGAD can play a peacemaking role, a developmental role, and also an integrational role. But it needs to be revitalized. For it to be revitalized, there must be normal institutional relations between Eritrea-Ethiopia. I'm not talking of the current regime in Eritrea. I'm thinking of a transformed Eritrea, a democratic Eritrea, and also a stabilized Ethiopia. And part of the problem between in the peace process is that it's not inclusive enough of all stakeholders, of all key political actors in the region. For something to be successful, it needs to be inclusive of the principal stakeholders. And so what is needed today is, as I said, change in Eritrea, a government answerability split, stabilization in Ethiopia, and of course the extension of central authority to the entire territory of Somalia. It needs to go beyond Mogadishu. And also a resolution of the standoff between Somaliland and Somalia. There are issues, Puntland, all of that. Somalia has in fact become a sphere of influence for neighboring powers. You have Jubaland and the one sphere of influence, you have this, that, okay. So, as we move forward, each country must put its house in order and come together, revitalize IGAD, an effective regional instrument for cooperation and integration. Short of that, I don't see much hope.
Okay, the last question, then Jamila will close the night for us.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you very much for just presenting this brilliant seminar, especially giving it to Eritreans, Ethiopians, all East Africans and Africans, so that they share the plight of the Eritrean people. At the same time, also they give their perspective and talk about the mutual issues. That's very, very good. And I would like to thank Tempo Africa, or Madizete, especially Tempo Africa, in general, bringing all Africans, giving voice, and that is very, very important. Thank you very much. So I would like to, question, but I'll put it in a comment format. The first one is about the narrative, the Ethiopian narrative and the Eritrean narrative and the history thing, which is, it's history, and people can talk about history in many ways. And the history of Eritrea, the history of Ethiopia, of Sudan, of Somalia, they interrelate, they have a lot of common things. But also, if you go back, the incursions and the invasions, whether they come from the south, or they come from the east or from the north, especially from Egyptians, from the Turks, or whatever, from some chieftains also from the south. So all that thing, that's our history. So that history is there, but we need to focus on the modern states of the Horn of Africa, or East Africa, or Africa. And those states are states, nation states. They need to live together, and especially in the economic integration, cultural integration, whatever that we need to do. So, I mean, how long do we have to just go like, oh, Ethiopia said this, Eritrea this, and going back to the narratives? I mean, probably that might create some kind of like, renew some unnecessary conflicts. So that's my comment, but of course you can go back to it, but I don't want you to dwell on it. My main concern is the conflicts, or the especially unstable, failed governments are source of conflicts. The Ethiopian-Eritrean conflict, and now there are other unstable countries or unstable regimes in the region. South Sudan, in Sudan there is a big turmoil right now. In Ethiopia there is instability. So all this, we know the conflicts
the origin of the conflicts are the leadership of the governments, but the people have the same interest, common interest. Since they are unable to solve their problems, what can the diaspora of these communities, whether Eritreans, Ethiopians, Somalis, Sudanese, can do together to avoid conflicts and to create mutual understanding so that they can work together for peace of the region? That's the main question that I'd like you to address, if you can just go back. Thank you.
First of all, I actually mentioned the narratives to put the issue in its historical context, not really to dwell on it, no. That we have aspects of shared history, there is no question. Okay? That we've had a checkered, sometimes problematic history, there is no question. The 30-year War of National Liberation is a case in point. Again, I stress the need to look forward. We must keep in mind of the past, so we use it to learn and to avoid the mistakes of the past and to build on the positive things that have happened in the past. And there are a lot of positive things. But I mean, being general, you cannot touch on everything. So that's one thing. What can be done? The diaspora. I think when you look at the Eritrean diaspora, quite frankly, what you see is divided, polarized, and lacking consensus as to how to make its contribution towards change in Eritrea. And that's part of the tragedy. It's not just confined to Eritreans. Diaspora politics is global. But what we need to do is reorient our mindset, overcome the politics of division, the politics of retribution, because we've had a past that also explains part of what we're doing today. We should think in terms of healing the past and building a basis for the future. So Eritrean diaspora politics should focus on contributing towards change that's rooted in Eritrea and driven by Eritreans inside Eritrea. It should look at itself not as a substitute for the regime, but as a complement. And so, if it reorients its thinking, its mindset this way, it can make a big contribution. It can strengthen the internal resistance. It can shape the course or the trend of the internal resistance. And it can play a very important role. Better resources, better proportion of educated professionals, skilled, expertise, etc. All of that. And financial resources also. All that could be put to good use. But first and foremost, the diaspora must get its act together. Must stop bickering and living in the past. Must abandon the politics of organization. Yes, unfortunately, for 10 years of civil war. But must transcend that. It was unnecessary again. Lack of wise leadership. Otherwise, we all will fight for Eritrea, for one Eritrea. One of the mistakes was in 1991, we have said, and so a failure or not, for 10 years. But now we have achieved our common purpose. Let's come together, resolve our differences, and build our country together. I think that would have been the right thing to do. So I think in terms of the Eritrean diaspora, I could say more, but that's enough. In terms of the, I think this is a good example of coming together. And for Eritrean, Ethiopian, Somali, Sudanese communities here, I think it's good to come together, discuss. As I think we said, what unites us is much greater than what divides us. And we can build on this for a better future for all of us. Because what is preventing us from doing that? What's happening in our home country? As Eritreans, our primary task should be to crystallize change from within Eritrea, inside Eritrea, play our role. And then, of course, come together in solidarity with our brothers from the region, our brothers in West Africa. I mean, we're talking about the African Union, African Economic Community, etc., etc. I think events like this will bring us together, and if they can be more systematized, organized, they could bear fruit, I think.
Oh. On that note, we end today's presentation by Ambassador Andebrhan. Let's give it one more round.